Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I am good, and I have my fingers crossed because there's a little bit of good news today and a lot of bad news, we like to think about the good side of things and trying to direct our country in that direction, which is always possible, but a real chore because we have a few enemies in well-known places like the media and the government and the educational system, everybody else. But I do believe that for the most part, we have the heart of American people who would like to take care of themselves and live free. And this is something that we want to talk about today. Is the resistance is receiving a backlash right now, and people are speaking out. A major event up in Michigan yesterday, and Kentucky's doing, but there's a lot of it going on, and I think it's going to continue to grow. And sometimes people just need a little bit of a boost to say, "Well, I thought I was the only one in the country that felt this way," but it looks like thousands were out yesterday, and we need millions out to express their opinion. And of course, my main goal is to have resistance without violence, and I think Martin Luther King set a good example on this because he achieved the things, but he really was strong on not using violence. Unfortunately, that philosophy didn't do him well because he was against the Vietnam War. But anyway, resistance is important, but the way we do it is important. And just remember, there's a lot of guns out there. I bet there were a lot of guns watching those demonstrations yesterday. And a lot of police out there, and they're not hesitant to use it. But the whole thing is they have a lot more guns than we have, and that's not very practical. To me, the power's in the ideas, and the power's in the ideas of liberty, and we have to convert people, and we have this opportunity because the power and the authority of the authoritarians right now, total failure. And I think that's what's being evidenced right now. You know, whether it's economics or health care or finances or personal liberty, it's all on the ropes. And so this demonstration now is a sign of hope where people are able to think through this and willing to stand up. You know, it does take courage to do that. You know, already in Germany, we saw one, lawyer speaking out, and they hauled her off to a psycho ward. I guess they learned that, back during the World War II, where under Hitler, that's what they did. But there's a hints of that now in this country. And of course, I think one of the motivations that have awakened a lot of people is the authoritarians' vicious attack on Christianity and other religious beliefs, and people who believe in honesty. You're sort of something weird, and so they know that they have to be intimidated. And that's what's been going on here for several weeks or months, to intimidate and scare the people. And that I think is their only tool, but they don't have truth on their side, and they don't have liberty on their side. And I think I've always argued we have the people. If they have the information, they'll be on our side as well.
Yeah, and you talk about them terrifying the people. But the reverse is also true because they are really afraid of the people. And that's what we're learning from things like yesterday, what we saw in Lansing, Michigan, where thousands and thousands of cars just simply blocked the Capitol area, blocked the Capitol, and blocked the entire city down. It was incredible. But, Whitmer had to be sitting there in the governor's mansion thinking, maybe this isn't that popular. And, she's the one that said, you can't even go get some seeds to plant in your garden. That's non-essential. Like a dictator. She tells you what's essential and what's not. The Kentucky governor, Beshear, he was shouted down from outside the governor's mansion by an angry mob. So people are frustrated and people are angry. And we can put up that first JPEG and you'll see why, Dr. Paul. But you'll also see how they're spinning it. This is CNBC. Weekly jobless claims hit 5.245 million, raising monthly loss to 22 million. And then they say due to coronavirus. Really? Due to coronavirus? Or is it due to that? Or is it due to these governors, these mayors, these little tyrants everywhere who shut down the entire economy and said, hey, you're non-essential. You're non-essential. Your business, it's non-essential. Go home. You can't pay your rent. You can't buy food for your family. So it's not caused by coronavirus, it's caused by politicians.
And that is the reaction to the coronavirus. And there was one comparison, there were 710 jobs lost for every coronavirus death, which is an equation that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, except maybe points out the overreaction, because it's really not the virus, but they'd like us to think that the virus is at fault. It reminds me of the statistics that came out during the first decade, and continue to come out after 9/11. 3,000 people killed, and believe me, this can really play havoc in emotions and do something. Give us the Patriot Act and all this stuff. So, but 3,000 people, Americans, were killed, and we sought out by giving tremendous power to the interventionists, strike back. So how many people have died? A lot more Americans have died. 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 people have died in war over this. Yeah. And the Middle East is as bad off as ever. The Middle East probably played a part in the motivations of 9/11. And then the millions that also have died. So this comparison, and like you say, it isn't the virus that did this, that lost his job. It was the government's overreaction to it. And we've gone over this so many times, and the evidence keeps building, and they refuse. They refuse to make a comparison between coronavirus and flu, influenza.
Seasonal
and
flu.
It is so evident there. Almost twice as many people dying from flu, but you can't even mention that. But no, you have to be hysterical. There has to be a hysterical reaction, an irrational reaction. But our job, with the help of many others, is to take this emotionalism and motivate them to move in a different direction. And some people call it courage, to stand up and do it. And I think we noticed that yesterday. People, with the 4 sheriffs speaking out, and people are speaking out. People are losing their jobs, and I think there's a lot of motivation between some of the ministers, but it still isn't quite there yet, because more people, whether they're religious or not religious, they should be, up in arms. I mean, if you have some people who are absolutely progressive and unreligious, they should be concerned about, you can't go to church, you can't even make your own risk, you have to stay at home. And then this automatic thing, I call that house arrest. Yeah. It's an arrest, violation of civil liberties. So I think what I witnessed yesterday is a continued stirring up of the people who believe in civil liberties and are rejecting the authoritarians' answer to running our lives, running our society, running our economy, running the monetary system, and trying to run the world with a military-industrial complex and building an empire. So I think that's all up there for grabs right now, but they're on the defensive, and I think you're right about that. You can see it the other way. They're fearful of us because I think the people, but they have to hone in on the correct ideas on that, and they can't just, the authoritarians have the guns. The answer isn't for us to have more guns and take them on. The answer is to attack them, philosophically, and also I like it when on some TV programs do a pretty good job of mocking them for the stupidities of what they propose.
Well, backlash is the right word, because when people are realizing how unbelievably they've been lied to, how massively they've been lied to, they are furious. They're angry at the Whitmers of the world, of the Bashirs of the world, and all these petty dictators who somehow felt they had the authority to suspend the Constitution and Bill of Rights. But the thing is, none of these people are going to admit that they were wrong, even though they're catastrophically wrong. And not only that, but all of these guesses about the disease, about the virus, have been catastrophically wrong. For example, even cooking the books. They said we must have, in New York, we're going to need 136,000 hospital beds. In reality, they only needed 18,000 is how many they used. And even with all the measures demanded by Fauci, he said 240,000 will die if you do everything I say. And now all of a sudden he adjusted it down to 60,000. It's probably, even with cooking the books, a lot less. They have so exaggerated this to scare the heck out of people, to force them to accept everything. Now that they're waking up and they are stir crazy, they can't pay their bills, all sorts of terrible things are happening, they're taking to the streets everywhere, and that is the big thing. They won't admit that they were wrong, but people are waking up and realizing how wrong they were.
Right, and this unwillingness to admit that something's wrong, and sometimes it's deeply embedded in their thought process, because they become sociopaths. Right is what they think, and right is what they say, and they are the authorities. And so even if something fails, we've mentioned so often, why don't they learn about, why don't the warmongers learn about this ridiculousness of the wars they start with no success? But people who can adjust, whether it's the harm they cause here, and I would say that at least 90% of our economic problems in this country are government directed. They're not directed by individuals causing financial bubbles. But the sociopaths are able to blind themselves. Just think of what if an individual who was truly honest was encouraged to do such a thing as participate in a military operation. A lot of people died. He almost always has to adjust, because I don't think he could bear the guilt. The only time I've seen that happen in politics was when Reagan, in his memoirs, admitted if he had not sent the Marines into Beirut, those Marines unfortunately died in vain.
Yeah.
And that for that thing, you could say Reagan was not a sociopath. These people, it doesn't bother them all. I don't think they have an ounce of guilt. And then there's not too much distance between a sociopath and a psychopath.
Yeah.
You know, they instigate some of this stuff just because that's what they live for.
And the real issue now that really needs to be addressed and come out here are the constantly moving goalposts that they use to justify this continued lockdown of the economy, and as you rightly call it, house arrest of the people. And this reminds me literally of, remember in 2014 with Syria, President Obama said, hey, I got to send a couple troops in there because there's some Yazidis on the hilltop. We got to rescue them because ISIS is after them. Very temporary operation. We're just gonna save these people. And now 6 years later, almost to the month, we're still there. We're still occupying, 30% of Syrian territory. And this is the same thing that's happened with the coronavirus. We were told, okay, we just need to flatten the curve, because if we don't do anything, the hospitals are going to be overwhelmed and they won't be able to treat people who are ill, and more people will die. So we're going to put these measures temporarily in place to flatten that curve out. It's not going to save any lives, because as many people will get infected as would from the virus, but it won't overwhelm the hospitals. Okay, they've put that in place. Maybe they want to take credit for that, having not overwhelmed the hospitals. That's fine, but that's done. It's done. The hospitals are, in fact, the problem the hospitals are having is that they're empty. They have to lay off a bunch of people, massive layoffs. But now they say, okay, we're changing the rules mid-flight. We have to keep the house arrest. We have to keep the lockdown until there's not a single new case of coronavirus, until they're all gone. And that's just completely changing the goalposts. And actually, Tucker Carlson had the New Jersey governor on last night asking him about this. How can you keep moving these goalposts? How can you keep changing what do you base this on? You keep changing the criteria. He had no answer, of course. He has no answer at all. But they cannot let go of this once they have it. Once they have everything in control, they just simply can't let go.
And look how they're clinging to this whole thing of war and justifying war. The conditions, according to some people who follow that rather closely, are saying, we're still trying to provoke something with Venezuela, and we have navies down there and threatening. And then also the use of economic sanctions. I mean, I can't understand why they don't understand that when you put on sanctions, you're really killing the innocent, the people, the leaders who direct all this. They don't suffer. They still have their food and their wealth. But the people suffer from this, and yet we have done this for years and years. We never changed it. In the midst of this whole crisis, we're talking about, still Iran and Venezuela, and that we need troops there. And the troops go, and they don't wear their masks, so I guess they're not too worried about it. So that to me is a real problem. But of course, this is part of the change that has to occur when the people are, as they wake up, they're going to start to realize authoritarian doesn't work. one of the motivations of these people who are upset now is the surveillance. They're waking up about the personal surveillance. But what about the foreign policy? And what about the economic policy, the financial system that takes care of the billionaires? And I imagine you've seen some things in the news. And in this tremendous downturn, probably the biggest in history, a few billionaires made billions and billions of more dollars, and they're on the receiving end of the bailouts.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole system is just crazy, and yet all this would be answered if the people would give up on the dependency of government and believing their authoritarianism is in their best interest. It's in the best interest of the special interests and the powerful people who are in charge.
Well, we've got a silver lining in that direction later on in the show, because wait for it, it's going to be good. But I thought we'd do a little protest update, Dr. Paul, because this is exciting, and I like seeing this, and the protests have been peaceful thus far. I think we have a little clip from the Michigan protest, just for a few seconds, just to see how massive this was. And this doesn't even show the cars. Listen for a second. And then there were thousands and thousands of cars. The line went all the way out, way past the city. Let's look at a couple of pictures too. Here's a picture from Michigan as well. This was sent in by David Dudenhofer, who wrote me an email and sent me some pictures that he took when he was there. And in fact, it's going to surprise you, Dr. Paul. He was working on your 08 and 12 campaigns. So there you go. There's the Ron Paul coalition coming back together again. Here, the next one I think is from Kentucky, where they're drowning out the governor trying to give a talk. Reopen Kentucky, they say, and they're furious. And then we have a good one from Ohio. A lot of people out in Ohio. A lot of people are furious in Ohio about this. So this is actually Kentucky as well, but there was a big one in Ohio. And in fact, the next one, even in our dear state of Texas, people are telling Abbott, they said peaceful protest at the governor's mansion today in Austin. People want Abbott to lift this shutdown. The deaths, thankfully, in Texas are very low. It's not a huge problem here compared to other things. So they want Abbott to wake up and lead the nation, right? We're Texas, we can handle it. So let's hope that goes well. And one final thing that you mentioned earlier that I wouldn't mind putting up before we go to our next segment. This is something you mentioned earlier that is actually quite interesting. 4 Michigan sheriffs say they won't enforce the governor's totalitarian orders. And this was signed by 4 sheriffs. They said, hey, we are not going to violate our oath to the Constitution of the United States by doing what you say. And let's hope a lot more sheriffs. There are a lot of constitutional sheriffs out there. Let's hope that they start standing up. Send a letter. Do something like that. It's a very peaceful way of saying, hey, you've gone over your bounds.
Right. I wonder if this is an appropriate time to talk about Politico.
Yeah, we do have to have a great clip that I'll read, because I think this is a good silver lining that we have. This is a great article that they put up today, and it's about backlash, and they use the word backlash that we sort of borrowed for our show. But this is the founding editor of Politico, wrote a column today, and he's talking about Senator Paul being diagnosed with the virus and then coming out of it and recovering from it. He says, now that Paul has recovered, he says he felt fine and symptom-free the whole time. It is a good time to ask, are we sure that the pandemic joke will ultimately be on him? What if the opposite is true? Far from rendering Paul's brand of politics irrelevant, it seems possible, even probable, that the wake of the coronavirus will be a powerful boost to the animating spirit of libertarianism. Leave me alone.
That is great. It's so great that I want to share this by me getting to read it, because that last paragraph is powerful. And I want to emphasize this. What if the opposite is true? Far from rendering Paul's brand of politics irrelevant, it seems possible, even probable, that the wake of the coronavirus will be a powerful boost to the animating spirit of libertarianism. Leave me alone. Yeah. I mean, this is a marching call, you know, and I think that people feel that way because I've always believed that when you take a poll of the American people and you disengage it from current politics and ask them if they'd like to be left alone in their homes and in their bedroom. Sure. How about being able to spend your money, earn your money the way you want, and getting to spend it the way you would like to? Yes. And what about getting out of these wars? Why do we have to be the policeman of the world? Do you know, like, probably 80% of the American people say, that sounds like a good program, but there's always exception. And Leonard Reed, who I thought was a great person, started the Freedom Fee Foundation, and he would say he'd go through all this, and he says, yes, but everybody has a but, and that is it, you know. And people who have the biggest buts are the military-industrial complex and the corporatism that we have, which is just fodder for the radicals, for another brand of authoritarianism, or a radical brand of authoritarianism, is that we allow, in the name of free markets and free market capitalism and the wonderful things that the Republicans do, put us in office and we'll balance the budget and all that stuff, and it never happened. So I think why I like this, because one of the motivating points in his article was surveillance. People are sick and tired of that, and it sounded like he was too. Yeah. And he sees the big picture because he's probably attempting with a few people who disagree with him to put this truth out. Yeah. Because if this has been written by others a month or so ago, you'd never hear about it. But this is an important article, and he's saying, hey, wake up. So I think this helps guide us in our resistance to the status quo here and guiding us against this authoritarianism that we have adapted to. And the only answer they're giving is more authoritarianism. Yeah. People are upset, but they say, we need more money. And every day you hear of another thing. They're probably up to $10 trillion, and nobody wants anybody else's money. They want ours. So we have license to steal, license to print. But things that can't go on forever don't. And this is not going to go on forever. So the people need to wake up and start preparing for which side they're on and what do they stand for. And I'll tell you what, it's a lot more fun standing up for liberty and defending the principles of the individual making decisions and having a voluntary society rather than an authoritarian society.
Exactly. And I'll close by saying I'm not in the business of giving President Trump any advice. But if I were in that business, I would tell him, watch a few minutes of that video. The people that are out there in Michigan and elsewhere, this is Trump's base. These are Trump's voters, and they want to go back to work. They don't want to be shut in their homes. They're tired of it. There is, I cannot deny, there is a political component to this. There is pressure by people who want Trump to lose to keep this shutdown in place and to put all the blame on his back for it. He would be very wise to take a look at the kinds of people who want to get back to work. I think it's very important. I'll close with a couple of things. First of all, a good friend of ours and a good supporter of ours is wondering if there's any protests going on in Chicago. So if you have any information, send it over. And by the way, you can send that info and any other pictures of your protests to media@ronpaulinstitute.org, and I'll include the email address in our description. And also, you'll also see in the description an address you can click to if you want to keep the Liberty Report alive with a tax-deductible donation to the Ron Paul Institute. All the information is there. And we appreciate our rapidly growing numbers, and we're so happy to work so hard to try to bring you the truth.
Very good. And one statement that annoys me to a great deal about the authoritarians in charge and when they're on television, which is all the time, you have to live with these conditions. It's never going to be the same again. You guys that are arguing against what we're doing, you can't get it back again. There's a partial truth there. But what they're saying is we don't want you to have even your freedom back. You have to have more authoritarianism, and you better watch out because this virus may disappear or be diminished, but there'll be a new virus. There'll be something else. There's always going to be a Pearl Harbor, and there's always going to be a 9/11, and always justifying the demand by the people to take care of them. So I would say that instead of saying it's never going to be the same, it's going to stay for the same, I would agree. We don't want it to stay the same because there's so many things that we can improve on the system that we've had for 100 years. No, we don't want it the same. There was relative, a remnant of our free system, and we thrived on it way out of proportion to the amount of freedom we were losing. But now this is a big event. This is a crash when it comes to the liberties that we've had. And this is what we don't want to go back to that, but we do know where we're supposed to go, that we can improve on what we had. The founders weren't perfect in what they wrote. The Constitution is not perfect, but it was the best. And it's gone now. Nobody cares about that except the people right now who are deciding enough is enough and we don't want this any longer. So there is an image out there of what liberty is all about, and there's no reason why we should lose this fight. And it annoys me to no end that we have not developed the skills to overcome the lies that are being told. So this is more or less what's happening now. Just think, this past week, it was decided that 3,700 more people died in New York because they didn't have a diagnosis. They never had a test for coronavirus, but they died of coronavirus, and therefore be angry, be upset, give us more power. Don't go back to work yet. No, the truth is coming out, because there is no truth in these people who orchestrate these events. There's no truth in our monetary system, and just spending more money is not going to work. So we need to make a line, a sharp line divided. Authoritarianism versus freedom and personal choices. There's a big difference. The founders liked the latter. And unfortunately, we have lost most of it. But I tell you what we're saying here today is that we see a lot of good signs and people waking up. So we would like to see a lot more people saying, we've had enough. You can't take care of us forever. We like our liberties, and we don't want to, be, traced and followed by our government every minute of the day, and we don't need implants, which some people have suggested. It's unbelievable. But anyway, we are, a bit more optimistic today because of what's happening in the country. But we are not, we're not casual and careless about the fact, we're home time, we're on our way home, we're achieving it, the tide has turned. No, it's just sort of hinting that it's going to change, and we want to help it along because I think it's worthwhile to do so. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.